today. I spent 19 years preaching the gospel, the good news that Jesus was coming any minute. And darn it, he didn't keep his promise. So I eventually had enough time to change my mind. I tell my story in my books. The most recent one is Godless, how an evangelical preacher became one of America's leading atheists. And who would have thought back then as a preacher? I know some of you were believers as well, right? Oh, this is Denmark. Excuse me. This is my first visit to Denmark, and what a pleasure. We're kind of jealous of you people. We freethinkers in the United States, after reading Phil Zuckerman's book and Gregory Paul's work, and in fact, we had both of them on our radio show, and to see that countries like this are just so wonderfully free of religious divisiveness. I did an interview yesterday with Christelijk Dagblad, is that how you say it? The Christian Daily, and the story will run tomorrow, and the photographer took a picture of me on that escalator out there. And if you notice up in the ceiling, there's this round circle. He framed it so it looked like a halo. And if they run that picture in the paper tomorrow, I guess that's a compliment, isn't it? But after 19 years of preaching, I changed my mind. I saw the light. I can't tell you that whole story today, except that I went through a gradual process of re-examining my faith from within Christianity. And I told the reporter yesterday, you don't start off as a fundamentalist Christian and then wake up one morning and go, silly me, there's no God. How could I have been so stupid? It was a gradual process within Christianity, because I don't think there is one Christianity. I think there's probably as many Christianities as there are Christians. They're all different little groups and they all disagree with each other. And I moved across that spectrum, popped all the way out to the other side and became, what I like to say is I dumped out all the bathwater and I found out there's no baby there. There's no evidence for a God. There's no good arguments for a God. And by the way, it wasn't until I read Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein's book, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, is that how it goes? And a work of fiction. And it wasn't until I read that I realized that there are precisely 36 arguments for the existence of God. And think about it, 36 is kind of an interesting number. It's the product of two squares. It's kind of an elegant number when you think about it. Looks like it was intelligently designed, doesn't it? Which means, paradoxically, that there are 37 arguments for the existence of God. And 37 is a prime. So where do you go from there? Anyway, I realized that none of these arguments, as Bertrand Russell said, when he was a young man, he was temporarily convinced by the ontological argument that there must be a God, and then he woke up the next morning and said, oh, silly me, it's just bad grammar. And all of these arguments basically boil down, in his words, to bad grammar. And now I get to preach a different gospel. I haven't changed. A lot of people try to analyze and psychoanalyze it. Dan, what was it that went wrong? What was the one thing that, and there was no one thing. It'd be like asking you, when did you grow up, if you have? In fact, I was in a church, a Unitarian church, 15 years ago or so in Michigan, and I made that point. I said, it'd be like asking you, when did you grow up? Do you know the exact moment? And a woman in the second row said, I remember the exact moment, but I forget his name. Now to preach a better gospel, a better message, and that is that the world will be much better off with a secular government, completely secular, godless governments. And working with the Freedom from Religion Foundation now since 1987, full-time, the year Annie Laurie Gaylor and I got married, working to keep religion and government separate through lawsuits, through education, through activities, and then also to promote non-theism in the world. And we do that through, as David said, through billboards and through book publications, through a national radio broadcast, which is then later podcast, through a weekly, monthly newspaper. And we're just going to hire our second full-time staff attorney, which is really, really great. In our country, this is quite an accomplishment to have more than 16,000 fully paid up supporters and growing fast. And what I want to talk to you about today is one of the most recent spurts to our growth, and that is a victory that we had 2 months ago on April the 15th, which, by the way, in the United States happens to be tax day, on April the 15th, a federal judge ruled in our favor on a lawsuit that we took, federal lawsuit, ruled that the National Day of Prayer in the United States of America is unconstitutional. And I want to tell you, a little bit of the story of that and some of the other lawsuits we have going on. We have a lot of issues at any one time. There's 9 cases in the courts right now that we are taking, and other complaints, dozens of other complaints. In fact, we complained about the Mother Teresa stamp. Do you know about that? The United States government is issuing a commemorative stamp honoring a non-American, Mother Teresa. And how they got that through violating our own post office's policies. Did any of you see me on that Daily Show, that silly segment that was on? I hope you don't watch it. It was, you know, they try to lampoon the news and they try to make their get. Well, that's what they did with me. I went on to talk about Mother Teresa and why we are complaining. And Jason Jones was trying to say, so this is your big issue. This is what you're, and of course, it's one little issue of many that we're complaining about, but they wanted to blow this up. In fact, they blew it up into this outrageous conspiracy theory thing. If you saw that clip, making me look like a kind of a Dan Brown, ooh, the Catholic Church conspiracy has its tentacles everywhere. And I was trying to avoid the word conspiracy because you know how they take those words on these shows and re-edit them. But somehow they asked me about, is it a conspiracy? And I said, well, no, it's not. You know, how do we know if it's, but in one sense, all religion is a conspiracy. Well, they took that word conspiracy and got it into the show, and sure enough, made me look like this, you know, conspiracy nut. But in any event, I did get to make some points, and I mentioned, and this didn't get on the show, I mentioned, well, you know, the only excuse the post office is giving for putting this non-American on our American commemorative stamp is that Bill Clinton made Mother Teresa an honorary American citizen. And Jason said, is there nobody he won't bang? They should have kept that line on the show. The United States of America, I'm embarrassed about the country and I'm proud. It's funny how you can love your country and hate it at the same time. Maybe we all feel that way, don't we, about the country we live in. We have something called the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and the very first amendment starts with the freedoms of conscience, and there are 5 of them: religion, speech, press, assembly, and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Those 5 freedoms of conscience are spelled out in our first amendment to our Constitution, but before those 5 are given, before those 5 freedoms are spelled out, first there's a non-freedom, a restriction that is given. The very first words of the very first amendment of our Bill of Rights says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or, and then it goes on to give the 5 freedoms. So the first words in our Constitution, in our amendments to our Constitution, are not a freedom at all. It's restricting. It's tying the hands of government. Government in our country, and I think in the whole world, should, as Greg said earlier, fold its hands and back off and be neutral. And Ron said the same thing. It's maybe one of the recurring themes of this conference, that the government cannot take a position on religion for or against, which is what it says on paper. In the United States of America, we are free to disagree on religious issues, but we are not free to ask our government to settle the argument. The government has to say, sorry, I'm not going to get involved either way. And by the way, our group would be just as opposed to the government officially proclaiming a day for atheism as well as a day of prayer. Back in 1952, in the middle of the big scare, Red Scare, McCarthyism, communism, godless communism, and all that, Billy Graham became a rising star because of his anti-communism. That's why the Hearst newspaper said, put this guy on page 1, because he was this strong evangelical preacher. Does everybody know who Billy Graham is, basically? Okay, good. Evangelical, right-wing Christian, salvation, that kind of thing. My brother Tom accepted Jesus Christ as his personal savior at a Billy Graham rally in the early 1960s. And when I was a Christian, I thought he was the pinnacle. Billy Graham was he wasn't God, of course, but he was like God's chosen spokesperson. In 1952, Billy Graham went to Washington, D.C., and had a huge rally. I think it was 6 weeks. It was a huge series of, they called them crusades back then, and big religious revivals. And some of them were at the Armory, and some of them were right on the steps of the national Capitol. And he had a lot of friends in government, a lot of congressmen in that. And during that crusade, in 1952, he said, America is losing its footing. We need to return to Jesus. We need to get Jesus and God back into our country. What our country needs is a national day of prayer. And so members of Congress proposed it, and it passed very quickly. And President Truman signed in 1952 a bill for declaring that the President of the United States should proclaim a national day of prayer, calling on all Americans to pray, calling on all of us to to worship a God and pray to a God. And it was during the mid-50s also that some other abuses happened. In God We Trust was made our national motto, even though our original motto chosen by our founders was E pluribus unum. Out of many come one. Many states, we have one country. Under God was put into our Pledge of Allegiance, as if we needed a Pledge of Allegiance anyway. I'm the last generation to remember going to school, and the last and earliest generation. I went to kindergarten and I learned the Pledge of Allegiance the original way, before it was tampered with. The Pledge of Allegiance ended with one nation indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, because we had fought in the Civil War and now we are indivisible. When I went to first grade, I had to relearn that Pledge of Allegiance. And it seems weird. The first time you learn something is the way it sticks in your brain. You know, even today, I have trouble inserting one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And it seems wrong. There's a word there dividing what is supposed to be indivisible, building walls between people.